been staged. What do you think of this?
Yeah, there's a lot to say about it. You know, I grew up in conservative and Republican politics, and there's a certain amount of conspiracism that sort of comes with the territory of being on the American right. It's kind of baked in since at least the 1990s, just due to a very skeptical posture about the American government in general and the belief that the media is in cahoots with the Democratic Party. It's sort of part of growing up on the right. But that was always sort of in confinement relatively throughout the culture. Something changed around 2016. Conspiracism really broke out into the public in a bipartisan way. I mean, you can just think anecdotally about family members and people you talk to who aren't involved in political news or commentary. I hear all the time now about stolen elections from my Democratic uncle, that Starlink rigged the last election. And I just recently went to a dinner last week in New York City where there were leftist protesters outside accusing us of eating babies inside the dinner, which, again, that is sort of a thing that was born on the right about a pedophilic cannibal elite that runs the world. But it is broken out in a bipartisan way. It's very disturbing.
Well, first of all, I'm very thankful the president of the United States was not harmed. Um, and second of all, I agree with Steve on a lot of what he said. And I think that I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I think that
Hmm.
the political violence needs to be tamped down, and it needs to be ended, and it needs to be called out. And look, the statistic about those who believe this was a conspiracy, it says more about the collapse of institutional trust in
Yeah.
America, distrust in government, distrust in media, and distrust in, political narratives in general. I think that social media accelerates that process. Within minutes of the shooting, there were competing narratives, there's misinformation, and false claims were already spreading across the platforms. And it just creates a very dangerous dynamic where Americans, increasingly consume entirely different versions of the facts.
Yeah, and can fuel some of the political violence, that rhetoric, of course, that we've seen recently, especially on social media. I want to move on to another topic with you both because Congress is back this week and lawmakers are focusing on securing 3 years of funding for immigration enforcement. So that includes Customs and Border Protection and also ICE. And we know that this has been an extremely controversial issue. Particularly Democrats have withheld funding for ICE because they wanted to see changes after federal agents shot two U.S. citizens in Minneapolis earlier this year. Stephen, I'll start with you. How do you see Republicans pushing to get this funding passed without any of the changes that Democrats have been asking for, things like, body cams for ICE agents and more accountability?
Yeah, well, I've just never really been of the mind that this is really about changes around the margins when it comes to immigration enforcements, body cams, and the likes. Republicans will play ball with things like that. At the end of the day, Democrats do not want to see ICE continue as an agency. And this was, again, sort of a bipartisan baby of the last 20 years that has become incredibly polarized. I don't see it budging anytime soon, and especially the fact that a lot of the Secret Service funding that is underneath that DHS umbrella here is going to be involved in the construction of the White House ballroom project.
Yeah.
I just want to kind of touch again on the conspiracism angle. There is a left-wing podcast out there called Midas Touch with 6 million subscribers on YouTube that has been pushing a conspiracy theory into the mainstream that the East Wing of the White House is going to be used to hide a secret army underground to stage a coup, and that is what the ballroom project is for. That is ridiculous and borderline funny, but it gets talked about in Democratic circles. And at that point, it's no longer funny. It's not a surprise to me that our country is unable to function on the most basic level.